Now this is my camera with a macro lens on it. But what do you do if you want to get closer than the minimal focus distance on the macro lens? So at some point you can't focus any closer. Now with 35mm, you can get closer than you can with 2¼ but with a camera like the Hasselblad, you can't really get that close. So what you're going to have to do is extend the distance from the lens to the camera body. Now how do you do that? Use an extension tube. An extension tube is just a blank tube. There's no optics. It's just a tube that extends that distance. Now on a camera like the Hasselblad that has the shutter in the lens, it's important that you put the tube on the camera first. So you put the tube on, then you put the lens back on. Now whatever lens you want to use, it'll have a closer focus distance. You're using the same optics, so if you have a great lens, it just allows you to use that great lens a little bit closer, a bit closer. So what I found was with this 16E extension tube with the 120 macro lens, I could get a picture area about 6 by 6 inches, and that was fantastic for a shot of something about the size of a gourd. Now it's not full frame on the gourd, but it gives you kind of like a comfortable area around the gourd to actually take a photo. So if your subject is something like this, then that 16E extension tube seems to work out fine. Now when you take them off, you have to take the lens off, then the extension tube. Only on cameras that have the shutter in the lens. If you're using just a Nikon, you can put them on in any order. Now when you buy the extension tubes, if you buy Nikon or Canon, you generally get them in a set of 3 and they're different sizes. Now when you buy them for Hasselblad, you buy them generally one at a time. So I've got a 16E and a 32E. That's probably all I'll ever need. These are great for taking pictures of things about the size of these gourds, so maybe some big flowers. They're not going to get close enough for real bugs, and they're not going to get close enough for parts of bugs. You see those great pictures of eyes of bugs? That's not done with extension tubes. So with a 32 extension tube, again, you put it on the camera first, you put your lens on. This allows me to get about as close as 4¼ inches. So my area is 4¼ inches square, my subject area. And that's fantastic for, again, a small item like this gourd kind of shot from this angle. Gives you an idea of the size. So that's 4¼ inches of subject area with the 32 extension tubes. Now you can actually stack the 32 and the 16 together, and that would allow you to get as close as 3 by 3 inches. So again, if your item, your subject, is smaller than 3 by 3, then you would want to stack those two tubes together. Now if you're shooting with Nikon or Canon or 35mm, you can again use one extension tube. They come, as I said, in a package of 3. You can use one, you can use the bigger one, you can use the medium one, you can put 2 of them together, you can put 3 of them together. Now because you've extended this distance physically, you're going to lose some light. With the 16E extension tube, I found that I lose about half a stop of light. So I took a picture of a gray card with just the lens, and then I put the extension tube on, and I took a picture at the same exposure, and then I opened up half a stop and opened up half a stop. Then when I looked at the negatives later, I kind of determined that it was about a half a stop exposure with the 16 extension tube and about 1 stop exposure compensation needed with the 32. So again, when you're using Nikon or Canon, you'll find that there's a little bit of exposure compensation needed. Now the better extension tubes, they still maintain autofocus and all the exposure. But if you buy a really cheap set, they'll allow you to focus closer. Again, there's no optics, so you don't really need to buy a great set. But you'll probably lose the autofocus, and you might lose the aperture priority and things like that, shutter priority, different modes, because they don't have the contacts. However, they do allow you to focus closer. And the only thing to remember, again, if your shutter is in the lens, you want to take the lens off before you take the extension tube off the camera. Otherwise, you'll fire the lens, and then you'll have to deal with that. Not a big problem, but it's always a pain. So if you're using a macro lens and you want to get closer, extension tubes a great way to do it. Inexpensive because there's no optics. It's using the original optics that you have. Now, you would also use them if you're doing portraits and your minimal focus on your portrait lens just wasn't close enough. You wanted to shoot a tighter headshot or part of a face. Most portrait lenses are kind of have, expect you to include the shoulders and things like that. So if you want to get closer again, you would use those extension tubes on a portrait lens so that you could focus that a little bit closer and get, part of the face. Great way to get close up. Again, it's not for bugs, it's not for parts of bugs, but it does allow you to get closer, and it does allow you to photograph, things the size of a baseball, a little bit smaller than a baseball. Things about that size, fantastic way to do it. Now, you do have to be careful that you're not causing a shadow to fall on your subject, which is what happened to me. The camera itself caused a shadow, so the subject was darkened a little bit compared to what I expected. So extension tubes allow you to get a little bit closer while using the original great optics that you already have. It's an inexpensive way to get closer shots.